Latino, Black and Latino, and I love. I feel like I'm doing a dating site, but
we can maybe make that work too.
You better not be doing a dating site, or else the next tweet goes to yo man. No,
yeah, exactly. This is why I'm so uncomfortable. Like, it's like, describe yourself.
Watch yourself now.
I'm a top. Black. 6 inches, 7 inches.
I am sending that tweet right now.
No, but I also am a program director at alldigitalradio.com. I've been doing radio, online radio for 15 years now. 10 years or 11 years with the Do Dirty Show, and then transcended to focusing more on LGBT urban music with a weekly top 40 and LGBT urban charts, and then also doing politics, a political show during the weekend too. So between those three things, I do want to say quickly though that I do want to talk to the lack of representation. I know that was something that I was discussing thinking about when the previous guest was saying, that the change in, your sexuality from being someone who identified one way in a certain part of our life and identifying another way in older in life. So I do recognize that, and I wanted to say that that's something that we have in common. So I'm just looking forward to the questions and talking more and getting to know more about the gay agenda, which I do think there is one. So
I love it. I want to hear about it.
It's definitely a gay agenda. I don't know why Tomas hasn't got the memo, but
I have some thoughts on why, but we can talk about that offline. How about that?
Okay.
What you both ain't gonna do.
I want to sip too. Are you gonna sip on me? I want to. You're not gonna like
no tea for you.
All right. Thank you, DJ Maker, for that intro. I appreciate it. And then guest number 3 is Alfredo. I'd like to hear from you.
Hey, everybody. So my name is Alfredo. I'm a lot of things. I'm only a hot mess on the weekends, by the way. That's a lie I tell myself, but my friends say otherwise. So I've been doing, I'm a college administrator. I do diversity work, or, has different names that, where depending on where you go, it'll be called diversity work, equity work, social justice work, in higher education. I identify as queer. Queer for me is a very political identity. I identify as pansexual. I'm also a Latinx immigrant. And I'm a Christian, just to spice it up a bit, but for me, really, I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation. I think it's important to talk about, the intersectionalities of the multiple identities that we carry as a community. And I think more importantly for me, I always like to talk about the complexities and the challenges, right? Because I think sometimes we like to focus on all the good stuff, but we don't talk about how difficult it is, and the tensions that exist within our LGBTQ plus community. So I'm just excited to be here and excited to start the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then my final guest number 4 is Jude Feng. Jude, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks. Also, I'm glad to jump in on this hot mess train. Apparently, everybody's self-identified that way.
Toot toot, Jude, toot toot.
Well, to lead off, I identify as an Asian American, queer as well. And Dr. Butler, I really appreciate that you kind of kicked off that, even in terms of kind of how you self-identify, has shifted over time. I would say it sounds like that's been kind of the case for some of us here, and that's true for me as well. I think those like L and the G and the B terms never felt good for me. So finally queer kind of felt good as well. Also a very political term. At this current point in time, I kind of consider myself non-binary, transmasculine. I think in, previous times in life, I would just say that I'm a trans guy. But, and I think I always kind of knew that wasn't true, but trying to kind of throw out my elbows and create some space for myself to be able to self-identify felt like it needed a hard swing in one direction before I could settle a little more, where it felt a little bit more where I'm at. I'm also very Texan. I feel like that's, just like hearing that there's people here from the East Coast, West Coast, the North. I feel like that's a huge part for me in terms of just, being Asian American. I feel like we're already very underrepresented, even when we're talking about the POC landscape. And, then we get into like regional differences and like different migrations and different histories of how people understand themselves and even the resources. And kind of like the political identity, the political movement on the ground is really different from coast to coast and in different regions. So I feel like being Southern and being Texan is really important to me and kind of like, self-advocating to say that it's something different. And I'm really proud of that. I do a lot of community education work just around some of those things. I grew up Christian as well. At this current state, I'm very like Christian, open spirituality kind of a blend of those things. So I think all those things inform a lot of how I feel about myself and my engagement and kind of the spaces that I'm in. And just because I do a lot of community education, it's around intersectional work. So, really like depending on what space I'm in, really deconstructing another side of that or reconstructing it or challenging it for different people. And I think currently sometimes I'm just like really fascinated and just talk about masculinity and Queer Eye for the Straight Guy has been great. I keep trying to sell people on it, even though I feel like it's very white, but it's hard to find consumable media that kind of demonstrates healthy masculinity. So I've been really into that lately, but really excited to be at this table with people. So.
Thank you, Jude. I'm all here. We could have a whole podcast about the Queer Eye because I actually said I think like it's in a lot of ways it's social justice work that they're doing, even though I don't think that that's their intention. And I love that that's happening on such a mainstream scale. I love all these kernels that I'm hearing of points of connection and then points of distinction and how you all have introduced yourselves. We're going to take a quick break and then we'll come back on the other side. I want to try to see how we can move the conversation forward and talking more about what this real intersectionality looks like for you in your life. So we'll be back in 60.
Most of us like to be out in the sun. That's why sunscreen and other safety measures are key to protecting your skin from aging and cancer. The FDA recommends using a sunscreen with an SPF of 15 or higher. Also, look for broad spectrum on the label. That means both harmful ultraviolet A and B rays are blocked. Remember, SPF plus broad spectrum equal healthy fun in the sun. Visit www.fda.gov/sunscreen for more information. A message from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration.
Creando conexiones durante la recuperación de un trastorno mental y uso de sustancias pone toda la fuerza de la familia y comunidad apoyándole a usted, ofreciendo apoyo y esperanza. Únete a las voces de la recuperación, fortaleciendo familias y comunidades.
Para información confidencial sobre desórdenes mentales y de uso de sustancias para usted o alguien que conoce, llame al 1-800-662-4357. Patrocinado por el Departamento de Salud y Servicios Humanos de los Estados Unidos.
So just on the other side of the break, we had everybody just kind of introduce themselves. And one of the themes that I heard, which is what I really find fascinating about identity, is that identity, even in my experience, is always evolving and growing. A big part of my identity is my Blackness and how I understand my Blackness and how I understand my femininity and what womanhood means to me have shifted over time. But DJ Baker said something really interesting about liking labels. And I think as a society, as a collective, we do like to be able to label things. We like to be able to say this is this and that is not that. But the human experience of identity is so much more complex and dynamic than that. And I heard a lot of that in each of your introductions and how you're even talking about yourself in this very moment. I think identity is also very contextual, right? And I heard Jude start to talk a little bit about that and his introduction. So the first question I really want us to maybe delve in a little bit more with is, how do you define intersectionality? And specifically, what does that look like for you? How does that show up in how you live your life, and in the spaces in your life that are most important to you? So what if we go back in reverse and start with Jude, and then we'll work our way back to Ebony? How about that?
Sure. I got caught off guard with the reverse order, but that's okay. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I have a very 101 definition of intersectionality, which is just kind of the intersection of different social identities, and we've already, I think in our intros, we talked a lot about some of our social identities. I think for me, I used to, just because I do a lot of trainings on this, I think I started kind of stepping away from it, and I started talking about intersections of even marginal identities, but also privileged identities. I would say just as an Asian American, and I think on the racial landscape and how things play out sometimes, there's this kind of gray area of at what point racially, the way that I'm being coded in a room, is it more affiliated with more power or less power? And so I was trying to kind of scratch at some of the privilege, but I feel like as sorry, this is kind of academic, but I feel like as time has gone on, and mainstream media is kind of picking up on this term, it's getting watered down a bit. I feel like people are just kind of talking about intersection as in any sort of intersection of identities, and it's just kind of arguing from that place, and it's just kind of a de-evolution of conversation. So I feel like more recently I've been bringing back more of the component of power in it that when we are talking about social identities and the whole the whole history of intersectionality came from Black women, from womanist theory, I think, that is very much based in power. And I think kind of reclaiming that framework of talking about it has been, I think, helpful for me. And uncomfortable for people too, when I bring that into a space to make people say but this is the focus of talking about people who fall at multiple margins of being disempowered, So I think for me, because there's a strange complexity with I think both race and also being masculine. I would say that as for me, I'm somebody who has gone through social transition and also, I would say chemical or medical transition, so even experiencing, there's a weirdness of the disempowerment of once being coded female and now being coded male, and then having, certain experiences of privilege that come with maleness, but then also recognizing, so if people want to look at a totem pole of power or something like that, maybe women would read me as having more social power in a space, if we're engaged in a conversation in a room and who's being heard. And so that might be true in one moment, but then there's also the fear of as soon as I'm outed as trans or something, depending on the space, then maybe suddenly I fall to the bottom of the totem pole and what that means, or, that's, and I'm speaking in very oversimplistic terms because that really overlooks trans women and, I feel like people who are non-binary in ways that, I'm okay using he, him pronouns and still being viewed in a more binary sense, so I mean, we're talking about oppression Olympics now and kind of taking over that.
Right.
But, yeah, but I mean, I feel like you give me the platform, I'll talk about intersectionality forever. But I
appreciate your bringing back in the piece about power, because I do think, to me, that part is it's fascinating because that is how systems of power work, right? Is that you can co-opt the language and then start to dismantle it. And I think that we are starting to move more away about, no, let's actually talk about the thing underlying the intersectionality and why it's important. And it is about disempowerment and access to power. So we can't talk about the surface without really continuing to have that more realistic, grounded conversation about why that even matters. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Did I hear you, DJ Baker, wanting to chime in?
No. I agreed. I was agreeing with June, and I was actually the thing that I had picked up